Hello, welcome to episode number 99 of CXO-Talk, your place in the hot sun on cold days with my gloriously warm co-host, Vala. Afshar, Vala, how are you?
Michael, I'm doing great. I'm not as warm as I would like to be, but I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for asking.
And I saw you did a vine with like, you had 12-foot snowbanks outside of your window there?
Right outside of my office, there's about 10 to 12 feet of snow. Yep, snowbanks. Yep.
Well, I was in Cincinnati yesterday doing a talk on something related to innovation and startups, and they had like a couple of inches of snow, but it was colder than here. It was really cold.
Well, the good news is our guest is going to heat things up for us in terms of sales and marketing innovation. So maybe, Michael, you can help with the introductions.
We are here today talking with Tiffani Bova, who is Vice President and Distinguished Analyst at Gartner. Tiffani, how are you today?
Hi, guys. Well, I thankfully am warm in Southern California. I think it's a balmy 68 degrees out and not a cloud in the sky. So I'm glad I'm not shoveling snow. I'm just watching the birds fly by and the clouds go by and the sun. And, listen, this is the time where you really appreciate being in the West.
Vala, I think we should. Why are we doing the show here, not there?
Tiffani, thank you for rubbing it in. And you're right, Michael. We need to take CXO-Talk on the road. But before we do that, Tiffani, maybe you can tell us briefly a little bit about your background.
Well, I am a Gartner analyst, and I have been here about 9 years almost, and I focus exclusively on go-to-market strategies and sales transformation and innovation for big technology companies, and I work very closely with all of our other analysts on looking at the trends and really what's that implication to vendors on how they then take their products and services to market. So I like to say I'm a recovering seller. That now vicariously gets to live through my clients without actually having to carry a quota. It's a good place to be, I have to say.
So sales innovation, is that another way of phrasing it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's always ways to improve, and I try to help my clients not look backwards and in the rearview mirror and really think about, how should they be considering new ways in which to engage and sell to their customers.
So you recently wrote this awesome article in Harvard Business Review, and it was titled Reinvent Your Sales Process While Still Hitting Your Numbers. And you talked about sales need to generate new revenue streams, learn how to sell new products through expanded channels and applications and customer segments. What is happening in the technology market that's affecting sales today?
Well, I think, as any sales leader, I think the biggest challenge and really the heart of that article is that we are responsible, and notice I still say we because, once again, I still vicariously sell, but we are faced with the difficult challenge of hitting our numbers on a quarterly basis, especially if it's a publicly traded company, right? So you have to start there. And even if you're not publicly traded and you're a smaller company or large and just not public, you have to keep the lights on, right? And at the same time as hitting quota and hitting your revenue numbers and keeping those lights on, you have to think about the transformation you have to make in the sales force. And it's a very delicate dance. And I coined that the seller's dilemma a number of years ago, and it's really taken hold, right? I took advantage of the innovator's dilemma and everything that brought to the market and how people thought about it. And I said, you got to think about it from how you actually sell. So if you, at the end of the quarter when you're getting pulled to hit your numbers and you were really in the middle of a project trying to prepare your sales force for 2 to 3 quarters out, you will always default back to hitting your quarterly numbers. And it just consistently delays that effort of thinking out into the future of what kind of sales organization you need. It's a really difficult place now for not only sales leaders, right? You've got chief executives and chief marketing officers. Everybody is challenged with hitting and delivering shareholder value and stock prices and revenue numbers while they're in the middle of trying to respond to the needs of the customers today. It's really tough.
So there's all these changes that are going on: cloud, social, mobile, data, analytics. What are the impacts of these forces, I was going to say trends, but they're actually forces, what's the impact on sales?
Well, I like to start by saying that, there's one thing I think I know for sure. Having sold technology for about 15 years before I took this job, technology is significantly different than it was just 5 years ago. And within that, Gartner talked about the nexus of forces, things like social, mobile, cloud, and information. And when you look at those, they're really just driving completely different consumption models out to the market, and customers have different demands. And with that, CIOs are extremely challenged on how they're going to maintain enterprises because of these forces in the market, and how they're going to respond to their customers. But more importantly, manufacturers of technology are now having to think differently about what kinds of products and services they take to market. And there's just, I think the pace of innovation has increased, but more importantly, it's just really complicating the way in which companies need to take their products to market.
Sure. So I have the privilege of speaking to CIOs on a fairly regular basis, weekly at a minimum, and I find that what's different today than perhaps a couple of years ago, even a couple of years ago, is if I had to rank the process in which they're going through the buying process, especially early on, I would say the number one is they're independently researching the vendors and technology and trends, maybe even half the time independent research. Then it's peer collaboration. They're talking to other IT leaders and different line of business leaders. And then lastly, it feels like they're talking to a partner or a vendor. Is this the power of social and hyper-connected world that we live, where independent research and peer collaboration is dominating, how they decide how to shortlist a vendor and begin their buying process?
Well, there's so much underneath that question, right? I mean, we could spend all day on that, but I'd start from a high level. As I'd say that, if you look back in time, it used to be that vendors were much more in control of the buyer's journey, right? As salespeople, we'd call 100 people, and 10 people would take our call, and then we'd set 2 meetings up, and then we'd show up, and we'd open up our laptop and give the PowerPoint presentation about our business and what we do and our technology and why it's better, et cetera, et cetera. And we were really in control of timing the information that the customer or prospect got from us. That is totally different now. Now, I think one of the most disruptive things in the sales world is that the customer, to your point, Vala, absolutely has more control of their own journey. They're going out and looking for information first. They're talking to their peers. They're looking for expert opinion, whether it's Gartner or others, and the provider ends up being 4th or 5th actually on that list, as they're looking for information. And so by the time they show up to a salesperson, they're 50% or so through their buyer journey already, which means sales has to respond very differently. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say to what you just said is not only is the CIO going and doing their own information and search, but as you know from Gartner, we said that we think that chief marketing officers are going to own a larger budget than IT, in coming years. And behind that is that in some of our research, when you think about CIOs owning the budget end to end, right? So looking for a solution, I'm going to go find it, I'm going to buy it, and they do it alone. That only happens about 25% of the time now. What ends up happening is IT reaches out to the line of business owner, and then they will, solve the problem in tandem, driven by IT, supported by line of business. The opposite of that is line of business drives, IT supports, and they go and sell, or line of business is doing it all on their own, right? And so it isn't, CIOs are faced now with, the impact of all this digitalization of business and social and mobile and cloud, opening up opportunities that not only challenge their infrastructure, right, but the way in which they can manage, secure, and keep their environment running the way that they want to. So I think there's 2 things happening, right? They're going to different places, but the complexity of the buying process because of line of business demands is really taxing the CIOs.
And that has given rise to, as Gartner terms it, bimodal IT, and I've seen other organizations and vendors call it two-speed IT. It's where, in a sense, you've got two types of IT departments coexisting together under one roof.
Yeah, and you're right on, and I think that bimodal, the two speeds of IT, we started talking about a number of years ago, and I think that when you look at speed one, it's really focused on renovating the core of the business, keeping the lights on, and in best case scenario or best in class, about 65% of the budget sits there. You've got, which that's kind of project based, steady state, RFP, long delivery times. It's very sort of scope of work focused. It's big, renovating a data center, even standing up infrastructure as a service, ERP deployments, right? It's that big kind of heavy lift in the data center and in the infrastructure. Speed two is much quicker. You got to think marathon runner in speed one. You got to think kind of sprinter in speed two. And it doesn't mean inside and outside of IT. It just means the speed in which the projects are being deployed. And so speed two is much quicker. It's about kind of innovate for new. And once again, in best in class, that's sort of about around 35%. And everything that starts in speed two and eventually ends up in maintaining and keeping the lights on, right? So it's this constant, starts in one and ends up at the other. And it's really about building a much more agile enterprise. And it isn't that we think CIOs need to run necessarily two separate divisions till the end of time, a team that's speed one and a team that's speed two. But early on, CIOs really thinking about separating those groups to get some traction in understanding what's needed in that speed two environment, thinking about standing up IT as a service broker, being much better about hybrid IT and delivering consumption in new ways, and bringing that towards one consistent role. But we've got CIOs who are very comfortable in speed one, and we've got CIOs that are very comfortable in speed two. And so as a personality, being a CIO who can run at two speeds is proving much more challenging than I think people had initially expected.
Sure. And I believe there's still a digital divide. The CIOs that I speak to, I still would classify them under traditional CIOs and innovative CIOs, and the ones that are more social, more collaborative, ones that are doing more independent research are more innovative CIOs. And recently, in fact, I think this week Gartner News published their survey of 2,800 CIOs around the globe, segmented by geography: China, North America, Europe. And majority of the CIOs in the U.S. viewed themselves as more digital savvy than their peers around the globe. And there seems to be a perception gap because based on what the different lines of business view IT, it seems like there's still more work to be done. And you actually talked about this gap in your, again, awesome Harvard Business blog. I only call blogs awesome if I read it 3 times. And I read yours 3 times because there was so much cool content in it. But you talked about compressed differentiation, and you noted 80% of managers said they believed their company had strong differentiated products, but fewer than 10% of those firms' customers agreed. Why the gap?
Oh yeah, there's so much behind that one as well, Vala. Great question. We could talk about this one all day too. But here's what I'd say. I'd say that Gartner started talking about this as well at Symposium a couple of years ago, our big event, that we kick off every year in Orlando, and we said all companies are going to become digital companies, right? And all companies are going to actually become IT companies. And what we mean by that is CIOs, as they start to digitalize their own business, they start to behave almost like their own service provider and vendor, servicing their customers internally. So a lot of that comment about, as they start to become, meaning the CIO starts to become more definitive on their strategy around digitalization and what products and services they're actually launching and delivering to their customers, sometimes they actually become appropriate to take out to market. You could say, look, is Coca-Cola a beverage company, or are they a digital company? Is Disney now, an amusement and entertainment company, or are they a digital company, with their Disney bands? And, there's examples everywhere, right, of where many companies you would not have normally thought of being an IT company doing that. GE, I think, is the 3rd largest software vendor in the world, not somebody you would have considered to be, right? And you see a lot of CIOs that are embracing the digitalization, as a way to actually create even greater differentiated advantage. Now, I think the disconnect, if I think about myself as a seller and a marketer, right, would be that they may have a view of what they're actually delivering from a product perspective, yet the end user doesn't feel that same thing, right? The 10% to the 80%, that disconnect between the two. And I think that has a lot to do with messaging and positioning for that CIO's CMO or marketing department to really understand what the product and service is, the value it would bring to the business, and making sure they are clearly communicating that to their customers. And if the CIO believes one thing and the customer believes another, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, it's got to be somewhere in the middle. So it means we got to help educate the customer more, and then we've got to get more information out of the CIO's mind to the marketer, and so that bridge between the CIO and the CMO is becoming even more important.
Tiffani, as you're talking about digitalization, or sometimes you hear the term digital transformation, it seems that you are making the assumption that the CIO is the center of that world, which I assume because so much technology is driving it. But in reality, is the CIO the center of that world? Is the CIO the leader in a sense, or is the CIO the executor of the business strategy that is being formed in other parts of the company?
Great question. So here's what I'd say there. It absolutely depends on what vertical and industry you're talking about, right? Because if we pick supply chain, you may say, they're developing some piece part, right? It could be a washer or, some kind of manufacturing part. And you might say it's probably safe to assume that there's no CMO there, right? Because it's very sort of way down in the supply chain. They're developing a product, and then it's being embedded or deployed out into other people's technology. But if you think about industries like retail, where the chief marketing officer is so important in the entire strategic direction of a company around how are they going to use digital channels in order to communicate and engage and leverage customers, whether it's social or mobile. So I'd answer that by saying it depends what industry, because in some cases the CIO is totally leading it. In other cases, it's the CMO driving sort of the brand positioning and brand strategy and really how and where that's happening. But I would say that, I like to think about looking at it in a connected model. We started talking about this last year or so, and we said, what's the product, who's the customer, and how do they want to buy? And if you can connect that conversation, it's the team that's deciding what's the right strategic direction, right? It isn't the products department saying, here's a product, and they toss it over the fence, and then marketing takes it and goes and markets it to anybody, and then tosses it over the fence and tells sales, here's the price, go, and be free, right? That connection between, what is the product, who is the customer, and how do they want to buy really becomes critical.
Okay, you mentioned customers. So we've been talking about the impact of technology meeting business process changing the business.
Yes.
But what's happening with the customers?
Yeah, I actually believe that the most disruptive thing in the market today is not technology, it's the customer. And why I say that is because, as you mentioned earlier, Michael, right, they know more information. Vala said they have more detail. They're going out to their trusted, advisors and their peers, et cetera. So the customer now, because we're all consumers in our personal life, and we have this experience with technology when we're at home, and with our smartphones and with our televisions and with our home computers, et cetera, we expect that same kind of relationship with our technology at work, and there is definitely a gap between those two things. So the customer has become far more disruptive, right? They're more demanding of what they want. They know what they want. Now, the trick with that is they may have misperceptions of what technology can do. They may have their own perceptions of what they should be looking at and what they need. And so for me, I don't think any decision should be made without talking to the customers, right? Because that's the reason we're all in business, right? We're in business to make sure we're satisfying and delighting our customers and really driving fantastic user experience and customer experiences every day. I mean, if we're not doing it for that, what are we doing it for, right? I mean, I know we're doing it for shareholder value and revenue and all that, but if you don't have a happy set of customers, it gets more difficult.
So you, in a Gartner blog, wrote a theoretical scenario whereby you were asked if you had $1 million to invest in marketing, where would you invest? And it was pretty cool how you answered that question. And a very interesting, clever, and insightful answer. Would you mind giving us a little bit of an overview of how you answered that question?
Well, now that we're amongst friends, here's how I would have spent it. I would have spent it on a trip to Tahiti and went and done primary research. That's what I really would have done. But since we're not really asking that question, I would say this, is I'd say I wouldn't do anything until I understood what's working and not working within the existing spend of marketing. It's the first thing I'd do. Second thing I'd say is, what's going on with our customers? What do they need? What are they trying to solve? What kinds of business problems? And then I would say, if we don't have alignment with sales, it doesn't really matter, right? And one of my, we wrote that blog, actually. It was a lot of fun. We did it with me as the recovering seller, and two of the guys on my team, Hank Barnes and Todd Berkowitz, came at it from a marketing angle, so it was 2 against 1, which I don't know how that happened, but it was 2 against 1, and I came at it and said, if the first thing I'd say with that $1 million is I'd try to, maybe I have to incent marketing to go on sales calls, because that's probably the first thing I do, because I think that marketing really needs to not only think differently about how they bring the brand to market, but they've got to get closer to customers beyond just data.
Sure. Of course, you did end with saying with all that savings in marketing, you would just hire more sales, but that was...
I was kidding.
So actually, I have a question for both of you. But first, I just want to tell everybody you're watching CXO-Talk, and at the top of the screen, there's a little button, and it says subscribe. Press it and subscribe to our newsletter, please.
That was our interruption.
Having said that, so Tiffani, we could say that you represent sales. And Vala, we could say as a CMO, you represent marketing. Who's more important?
I represent both, but okay.
I want a little jib jab. I want the little jib jab.
I want to know who's which matters most and when, and who's got the easier job.
The hardest job in any business is sales.
Oh, Vala. Love. We have love.
That was easy. I guess our work here is done.
Please tweet that out from a CMO. Please tweet that out.
I will do that. I started my career as a software developer, and just being naive, I thought folks that were working on building custom silicon and ASIC and 5 million lines of code in our switches and routers, they had the toughest job in the company. But I grew up, and no doubt the hardest job in any company is sales.
Yeah, so I'd say this. In all fairness, yes, while I bleed sales blood, I've also run marketing, and here's what I'd say. I'd say this. I think one of the dangers I'm starting to feel is that we've always had a difficult time being close between marketing saying, look, we're driving leads, and sales doesn't follow up, and then sales saying, we're getting leads, but they're not good leads, or the materials that are given or the content that's produced isn't effective in front of the customer, so I end up rewriting it all on my own. There's always been this tit for tat between sales and marketing, and while we're not going to solve that in 15 minutes for sure, the one thing I'd say is that I worry as more digital starts to take over, and marketing starts driving more digital, that it actually is creating a larger divide between sales and marketing, because you see replication of duties in the marketing department, like marketing operations. Well, sales operations has always been there, and so why don't they just leverage sales operations? Well, they don't leverage sales operations because there might not be a lot of trust. And so building trust between the sales and marketing department is becoming something that I think just can't continue to be ignored. We've got to find a way to bring it together versus dividing it further by saying, marketing is going to have more control over, revenue and buying and the buyer journey, and we don't need sales to touch it at all. It's all going to just happen through digital means and through marketing means. And I think that is true. However, I also believe that if there's a touch along the way, we got to make sure that the two are working together, right? Because if you've got people pulling it in separate directions, the customer knows it right away. If the customer feels that the brand is talking out of two sides of their mouth, one from marketing and content, and then when the sales rep shows up in front of them, it's almost a completely different conversation, that's a terrible experience, right? So, while I joke that I'm the seller and you're the marketer, I think at the end of the day, we've got to find a way that the same kind of synergies we're trying to create between the CIO and the CMO, we absolutely have to create between the CMO and the Chief Sales Officer or Chief Revenue Officer. And once again, I'm going to go back to, I think it has to be the triangulation of all three. I think all three have got to come together to work more closely. And then it's a united front. It isn't one owns it and the others are, sort of executing, right? One's strategizing and one's executing. It's all are strategizing and then each play their part in the execution of it.
How many organizations have that? That's a very, very difficult thing to make happen, to align CIO, CMO, sales, marketing, and IT. It's very, very difficult to make happen.
Yeah, and I wish, because I work here at Gartner, my clients tend to be, because of where I am in the Gartner ecosystem of analysts, my clientele is 98% tech companies. So I can speak pretty specifically about them, is that unfortunately it isn't common. When I went out and did some primary research a couple of years back and I asked this question, as a sales leader, or as a channel sales leader, how often are you involved in product development, product management, product marketing meetings as solutions or products are being developed? And it was a sad response. I think I had 2 out of 15 I talked to said it's a regular occurrence. And really others were like, it's kind of spotty. And that's that, the product gets tossed over the fence, marketing gets engaged, figures out how are we going to market it and start creating the collateral, and gets tossed over the fence, and then sales has to go sell it. And that disconnect between the strategy of the organization and the execution in the field, which I like to call the last mile, I think is getting broader. And so that a lot of that was brought up in the Harvard Business Review blog that I did with Frank. Sure. So good stuff there.
Yeah, I think, Michael, the challenge is that, so as companies go through their digital transformation, there's an expectation for marketing to measure the impact of marketing. So there's investment in CRM and marketing automation, community, social listening platforms. Certainly a good majority of the program spend is shifting towards tech spend and marketing. So now the Chief Revenue Officer expects you as the marketeer to be able to measure the campaign impact and show how X dollar of spend in marketing will produce Y dollar of pipeline and Z dollar of closed business. And so there's a challenge for marketeers to do that. And in B2B, the complexity of product may limit you from taking advantage of things like e-commerce and other, campaign drivers where marketing can own a number and not just talk about contribution and attribution and sales influence, but they actually carry a quota, like sales.
Right.
And I think that's when you see, mature marketing organizations, ones that actually own a number. I don't know if you agree with that, Tiffani.
Yeah, well, I always joke that, whenever I hear anybody in marketing say, we're going to own more of the buyer journey and more of the sales process, I'm always like, hey, the moment you own a quota and, you're sitting at the table at the end of the quarter getting, spoken to about why you didn't hit numbers, I'm all for it, right? But if I'm the only one in there having that conversation about why we didn't hit numbers, that's not very fair, right? And that comes back to that. It has to be that trifecta of the right products to the right customer through the right sales model, and all three need to be held accountable. The problem is, as you get higher in the organization, that becomes easier to do because executives are are bonused and comped and managed and measured differently than someone who is lower in the organization, who is really only responsible for a piece of the business. And they're like, that's all great that, we got the right products to the right customers, but I, as an individual seller, am just trying to hit my numbers, right? And I'm not interested in getting into this who's responsible. I'm just trying to sell. I'm trying to service the customer, satisfy the customer, hit my quota, earn my commission check. That's what I'm focused on as an individual contributor. And so the culture of the business has to start to embrace, all the way from the top down, that we've got to start to look at this as a team effort, regardless of who carries the quota. And that goes back to that, well, marketing isn't responsible for the quota, so I just got to do what I need to do, and do I really think marketing is going to carry a quota? I don't know. We've been selling e-commerce now for 15 years. And you could say marketing could have carried it back then when it was banner ads driven to a website and a straight purchase, right? You could tell cost per click. And so e-commerce driven sales has been around for a long time. And you could say when, Eloqua and others showed up and it was now, chat-based selling, which I was doing in 2000. I was one of Eloqua's beta customers. There was tough tracking for the sales rep that once they chatted and the customer went and bought online, I couldn't tell that sale happened because of the chat. Right. So that's been a problem for 15 years, right? I think the trick now is technology has advanced so much more that the data analytics and the sales analytics and the marketing analytics, if you use it appropriately, can absolutely become much more, number one, predictive, sure, but number two, much more valuable to being better at winning in the eyes of the customer, right? So I think that's what it's all about.
We have a question from Twitter, from Arsalan Khan, who says, well, isn't the solution to this to have marketing and sales report to the same place?
Sure, I'd love to have marketing report to me. I'm all in. Oh, is that not what we meant? That's not what we meant? Okay.
I think we were talking about a brand collaboration where marketing and sales reports to me.
Got it. All right. Sorry. Us sellers, it's all about us. I would say that, there are certain organizations, and I know outside of technology, I think it's much more prevalent, where you've got sales and marketing much tighter aligned, because of just the organizational structure. On the technology side, where it tends to fall, right, is it reports into the chief operating officer or into the CEO, and you've got two executives sitting at the table. I just really think that it has to come down to, they have to understand that they can't survive and be successful without the other. And so they've got to, at the executive table, figure out how to, regardless of where they report, because that's a way to fix a cultural problem, right? By saying, well, he reports to me, so now he's going to do what I tell him to do, versus saying, regardless of where they report, we're doing it because this is the right way to do it for the organization, and more importantly, once again, it's the right thing to do for the customer.
You don't mean put personal agendas aside. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the fifth on that. How about that?
Well, yeah, I think even in your blog you alluded to, in order to have effective selling marketing, you have to be aligned with your company strategy, and I think it makes sense that company strategy, product strategy, marketing strategy, and sales strategy. So if you don't have that alignment from the top to the bottom, it's hard to have, as you said, a differentiated message. And also, you noted in your blog the C-suite changes around the seller's dilemma. Executives reporting to the CEO have doubled in the past 3 decades. So you have to also find a way. How do you build consensus when you're targeting an organization, when you know that your buyer decision team is 4, 5, 6, 7 individuals?
Yeah, and really, the challenge is all about this. It's the personal side of it, right? It's the soft skill. It's more than anything, it's trust, right? I think that building trust takes time, and if executives are coming in and out of the organization, it's much more difficult to establish trust and then build upon that trust. I know in my career I've worked with people where I would trust that they would do the right thing, and if they did something, I would never question it, because I'd be like, they wouldn't do this for any other reason. Like, I don't think there's any hidden agenda or personal agenda, kind of what Michael alluded to. I know it was for right reason, right? But it takes time to build that trust and create that kind of synergy between executives, as well in the field. You know, if sales is going to trust marketing, they've got to constantly prove it day after day after day. And if marketing is going to trust sales, same thing has to happen. So I think the turnover at the executive level makes that ability to establish trust even more difficult. Sure. And that's the kind of like unseen things, right, that you can't manage and you can't measure. You know, do they really trust each other to come together in a way that is really for the better of the company, and more importantly, the better for the customer?
Right. So Tiffani, you write your clients are IT organizations, IT sellers. So can you offer advice to enterprise buyers? Because that's the flip side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's some research that we put out that actually really hurt my soul as a seller. Was customers now view the least valuable interaction during the buyer journey is with sales, the least valuable. Wow. And this is an opportunity for sales to step up. And part of the reason this is happening, as Vala alluded to, that customers have done a lot of research on their own, and then when they eventually reach out and call the provider or the provider's channel partner, you know, their value-added reseller or systems integrator, and they call them on the phone, the sales rep, because of the way that they're managed, takes them backwards in the journey. Well, wait a minute, I have to do all these things in order to enter it into my, you know, CRM system or my PRM system, and I have to make sure I'm crossing all my T's and dotting all my I's before I put you in my system at 30 or 40% of where you are on the journey. And so customers are getting frustrated with the fact that sales doesn't understand their pain points, doesn't understand their vertical or industry very well, and they just come in being kind of generalists and behaving the way that they do in front of all customers. So, you know, as a buyer, I think that you've really got to make sure that you're clear with the sales rep about what it is you want them to come and bring to the table, right? Because sometimes if you're a little unsure or ambiguous about what that is, the sales rep is going to try to hit all kinds of topics to make sure that they're satisfying what they want, right, versus saying, look, here are the 3 things I need you to tell me, right? I'm trying to find out, will it technically work with my environment? You know, have you used or done this in other industries or verticals that look like me, feel like me, have the same situation as me? And then more than anything, you know, how will you support me through this entire project before and after the sale? And so I think customers have every right to expect their sales rep to be stepping up and being a much greater resource for them for information and thought leadership and competitive differentiation and all that information. And I think it's less about speeds and feeds at this point. I really do think it's about the value and outcome of the technology solution and what it will bring to that business.
Sure, sure. Well, is this really about, and I'll ask this because, is this really about social selling? And the reason I call it social selling is we've had some of the top CIOs in the industry, from Intel, HP, Dell, Accenture, all these CIOs as guests on CXO-Talk. And when Michael and I ask them in terms of advice to sellers, very often, in fact, almost universal, they're upset when the seller asks a question, you know, what are your priorities? What are some of the challenges in your business? Because most of these extraordinary CIOs that we've had on our show, they blog, like Kim Stevenson from Intel. She has a video blog. She's on Twitter. You know, she blogs regularly. So she has the State of the Union from Intel published every year. So if you just did a little bit of research, you know exactly what Kim is trying to achieve at Intel. So opening up your sales engagement with what are some of the issues that are top of mind, I think immediately shows that you didn't do your due diligence. Do you think advice to sellers, for you to stay relevant and speak the language of your customer, you need to realize that research and collaboration and being part of forums is really key for you to do precision selling?
It's a great question, and you know, social selling is sort of the new buzz of what everybody's talking about on ways that sales is now engaging differently with customers, et cetera. And I couldn't agree more with you. And that goes back to the comment I just made, that customers are saying the least valuable interaction is with sales, because they come less prepared than they potentially could. I get a lot of reach outs via LinkedIn or Twitter or even email, right, where a sales rep for a particular company will reach out to me in my position here at Gartner and try to sell me something. And I mean, clearly, if they did even 5 seconds of research on me, you'd realize I'm not buying anything, right? It's kind of not what I do, And so, I looked at your profile and I think you'd be perfect for this. And if I have 5 minutes, I feel really badly about it. But if I have 5 minutes, I reply back and go, teaching moment. If you've really done your research, you would have realized I'm clearly not your target audience, right? And so you're correct. I think that there's a lot of work out there around best practices on solution selling or social selling and all of that. And at the end of the day, it is really about sales reps stepping up, honing their craft, and being better. And what got us here is not going to get us there. There are so many things that sales now has to personally take ownership. They are responsible really at the end of the day for hitting their quota, obviously. But the only thing that a sales rep really has control of at the end of the day is their own behavior. It's the only thing a sales rep has control of, right? As a seller, I can't control the price. I can't control the product. I can't control who I get to sell to. I mean, I have very little control. The one thing I have control over is how I behave in front of the customer, my integrity, my ability to drive trust, my preparation before I sit in front of a CIO, my preparation around things that I do online like blogging and tweeting or whatever it might be, connecting out on LinkedIn or whatever, and that's the only thing I can control. So there's nobody you can blame except yourself, right? And if it's a canned message that comes from marketing and they're saying to you, just send this out, canned message, that goes back to what I said, right product, right customer, right message, right sales model, then there's a disconnect between, but the content's not right and you're telling me what to do and as a sales rep I'm just doing it. Doesn't take that control back, yeah.
So Tiffani, we have just a few minutes left. You've given some advice to enterprise buyers. Now, what's your advice to technology companies, to the enterprise sellers?
To their own sales reps?
To the sales reps or to the people who are developing the strategy. You've actually just given some advice to the sales reps. So how about to the sales management and even to the marketing department who are formulating the strategy? Just your advice and wisdom for those folks.
So I'd say this. I'd say that unfortunately, sales management still manages the seller, their individual rep, with the same metrics and tools that they've always measured. How many calls did you go on? How many emails did you send? How many phone calls did you make? How many proposals did you give? What percentage is it in the pipeline? Why isn't this deal moving? The pipeline calls every Monday and Friday have been the same for 10 years. Yet we just spent 45 minutes talking about how technology has changed, how the buyer's changed, how the buyer journey has changed. So how is it possible that the metrics can stay exactly the same? So as a sales manager, you've got to start to look at the way in which you manage your sales force to accommodate the fact that the buyer is on a different journey. So I like to give this example all the time that I say, if I were a sales rep and you were my manager and a customer called me and they were 50% through the buyer journey already, and I had to enter that into my CRM system. Would I put that deal at 10% probability to close or 50% probability to close? Unfortunately today, a sales rep would put it at 10%. Because if they put it at 50%, I like to say it's like second grade soccer. It's like the soccer ball. Everybody runs to the soccer ball. We got to close this deal. Oh my God, it's 50%. How do we? Let's get all the executives. And it's not reality. So, management has got to start to give some freedom and space to manage their sales reps differently in the way that they measure them, with the pipeline meetings, with the way in which they have those calls, the way in which they get trained. And I think it's really important because until that happens, sales will always, what I like to say is they will always manage up, right? I'm going to manage to my manager who manages to their manager who manages to their manager. And the pipeline makes its way up. And if every sales rep puts a deal at 10% when they're really at 50%, how accurate is that pipeline?
That's right.
It's not accurate, right? And it also isn't helping marketing realize, is what we're doing working? Are we getting better quality leads? Are we driving the customer further down the buyer journey? Well, it won't appear so if you look at the pipeline and everybody says 10%. So I think sales managers have got to start to figure out how can they balance that. But once again, until that seller's dilemma gets solved, if I'm a manager and I'm trying to hit numbers, I'm not worried about trying to think about how do I reimagine my sales funnel and pipeline. I'm just trying to hit numbers. And it's really raw for them, especially the managers who have to manage up and manage down. Difficult.
That's Michael, remember I told you before the show started that we were going to have the blogger's dilemma of taking Tiffani's wisdom and narrowing it down to only a 2,000-word blog? I have no idea how I'm going to do this.
I know. Writing these blogs is tough. We have guests like Tiffani who...
Just crushing us. You dropped so much science on us in 45 minutes. That's.
I hope not. I don't think I've ever been accused of dropping science on anybody. I hope that's not the case. But,
How about if we call it scientific selling?
Scientific selling. That's right.
All right. I'll take that.
It's unbelievable insight. Thank you so much. Time flew by. Michael, do we have time for another question, or close to the end?
We're pretty much done, but go ahead, Vala. Just and then Tiffani, answer it quick.
Your views on segmentation, from account segmentation to buyer segmentation, so that you can not only understand the persona of your target buyer, but also to develop a buyer journey map. Is segmentation key to precision sales and marketing?
Yeah, I'd say this. I think every vendor in technology has the segmentation map that looks like a triangle. And at the top of the triangle is big accounts that they sell direct, and then under that is with global SIs, and then below that is with their value-added resellers, and below that is just with value-added resellers. That segmentation strategy, I like to call it the Bermuda Triangle of segmentation because it's adding no value. Right. So, in 1 minute we have left, I think I'd just leave it that, marketers have got to go on sales calls with their sales team, and I want to stress that marketers need to stay quiet in that sales call and act like they're a new sales hire and they're just there to listen, because the moment they say they're from marketing, the conversation will totally change. And they can actually hear how well their content and segmentation and buyer journey mapping is doing live in the field, whether it's via phone or face-to-face. I challenge marketers to go out on a sales call at least once a quarter. And I don't care which way, right, over the phone or not. And then you can start to challenge and validate your segmentation strategy. But that triangle's doing you no good.
Terrific advice.
All right, and on that note, the Bermuda Triangle of sales. I think our time here together today is done.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I so appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to speak on your segment and be part of a library of some really fantastic names and big hitting executives and CIOs. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you. We're grateful that you would take the time. Vala, I hope you stay warm.
I'm warm now.
And we've been talking on episode number 99 of CXO-Talk. We have been speaking with Tiffani Bova, who is Vice President and Distinguished, and I have to say I like that word, Distinguished Analyst at Gartner. She's genuinely one of the top enterprise technology sales analysts in the world, authorities on this topic. And Tiffani, I hope you'll come back and join us another time.
Anytime, and I'm looking for the jib-jab marketing sales between Vala and I.
It sounded like there's too much of a love fest between you two.
I just didn't want to get TKO'd by a world-renowned expert. So next time maybe.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, and everybody, subscribe to our newsletter. It's good. That's the good deed for the day. See you next time for episode 100 of CXO-Talk. Vala, take care. Stay warm.
I will.
See you everybody. Bye-bye.